Kuki strutted down the halls with a confident aura about him and a smile on his face. He'd just got back from the fashion club, and Shiroku and Kano just finished designing him a whole bunch of badass dresses. Honestly, nowadays he wondered how he could stand living how he used to. Putting aside the whole stuck in a wheelchair thing, which sucked for obvious reasons. He was just so nothing. His style was non-existent. His clothes were drab and boring, and nothing else about him had any substance. Oh, how things had changed. Now he walked about in his stylish black dress and matching dress shoes. And his makeup only enhanced the coolness of his look. His hair was, unfortunately, still too short for his liking, but it would grow in time. He made sure to use all the proper shampoos and conditioners to make sure it'd grow nice and healthy. But for now, he was stuck with wigs, which were fine for the moment. And the result of all this was a feeling of power and control Kuki had never felt before. These clothes, the makeup, and the hair just brought him a sense of giddiness and confidence that he couldn't imagine living without anymore. Of course, being that they were girls' clothes, other people sometimes saw him as strange. Although no one in the house really bothered him that much about it. Most just gave him some surprised looks when they found out it was actually the first time he'd seen his brother express so much. He wished he'd had a camera to capture the look on his face. The only person who'd really given him any grief was Ken, and he only ever made some light-hearted jabs at him and his attire. No real malice behind them. He could still fuck right off though. Soon enough, he'd be able to master his look and even make his own clothes. Life was sweet. Honestly, he didn't know what could possibly make it better. ELAM. Suddenly, as Kuki was walking past the training room, when he heard the sound of gunfire from inside. What the heck? Kuki stopped and looked inside the training room and found AKA along with Giza inside. AKA was using some kind of gun to fire at some targets that had been set up in the room, with Giza watching over her. Stop, center your aim, steady your breath, Giza told her. AKA adjusted her aim a bit before Giza told her. Fire. ELAM. AKA shot at the target, and the dart landed on the target a bit off the bullseye of the mark yet again. Curses. AKA hissed. Yes, but you were close enough. You'll master the weapon in time, Giza told her. Don't let frustration grip your heart, lest it cause your aim to falter. Meanwhile, Kuki was just looking on in amazement. He'd obviously known about guns before. His handlers had ready access to them after all. But he'd never really gotten a good look at them before. The closest he'd gotten was barely seeing a few pistols that were still in their holsters, and hearing some of the other kids being trained with them. But never once had he seen them like this. So cool, Kuki exclaimed, his eyes practically shimmering with excitement. The way it looked, the way it shot, they both just seemed so cool. Kuki quickly imagined himself holding one and found it very much fit his aesthetic. He had to have one, or more. He'd heard there were multiple types. He'd have to look into that. But first, he'd have to convince Izuku to give him one. No, Izuku said sternly. Kuki pouted heavily. I knew you'd say that. Of course, when Kuki knew very well that Izuku might refuse his request. Izuku had a tendency of doing that. Well, with a few exceptions, probably a lot of exceptions. But still, his point stood. Guns are too dangerous for me to just give to children. Most adults aren't even allowed to own them in most countries. Izuku explained. Yes, Akka has one, but firstly, that gun is designed to shoot darts that inject pieces of herself into targets. Even if she accidentally shot someone with it, it's unlikely they would get any serious injuries. But even then, she's only allowed to use that when she's alone with a professional like Giza. And due to the way that AKA's body works, even if she accidentally shoots herself, She'll be fine even if she was using a normal gun. How dangerous can they be? It's not like I'm gonna aim the gun at my face or try to shoot anyone. Kuki argued ignorantly. First of all, guns can often malfunction, causing various accidents and injuries. Second of all, bullets can do this thing called ricochet, which means sometimes when you shoot a target, the bullet will bounce around and accidentally hit someone. You need to be trained to make sure that doesn't happen. Look, I can send you a whole list of reasons why guns are dangerous, but long story short, my answer is no. Izuku told him. And as I said, it's illegal for most grown adults to own one, let alone children. If people saw that I let you have one, the whole world would rightfully say I shouldn't be taking care of children. Why do you even want a gun anyway? Because it looks cool, Kuki said indignantly. It looks so cool, I need one. Oh, well, if it's just for looks, I can get you a replica. Izuku offered. In terms of looks, they're pretty much the same as regular guns, but they don't actually fire, so they're not dangerous. Kuki pondered that for a moment. On the one hand, he really liked how cool guns were when they fired, but he could tell that this was the best he was gonna get. It was either this or nothing. Fiending. Kuki relented, but they better look cool. I promise you, they absolutely will, Izuku assured him. After that, a spark had been lit in Kuki, a spark that exploded into many new interests that he'd never thought of exploring before. The first was, of course, his new love of guns. Izuku had given him a whole catalog of model guns, all of which looked awesome in their own unique way and would all look awesome in his little hands. But that wasn't enough, he needed more. And so developed a new hobby, movie watching. Now, of course, Kuki had watched movies and TV shows before. He'd done a lot of that after he joined the family, but before he got his quirk removed. His sister would often just put random kids shows on, and he watched them due to not having anything better to do. None of that stuff ever grabbed his interest, but with his new obsession with guns, he now had films he actually wanted to watch. War films, spy flicks, John Wick type stuff. And it was awesome. Bam, bam, bam. Speaking of John Wick, they were watching one of the movies from its sequel series, Baba Yaga. So cool. How did he even fire so many rounds that quickly? Kuki asked as he watched the movie in awe. That's called burst fire. It lets even smaller guns shoot rounds really quickly with only one press of the trigger. AKA explained. Cool. Cuckoo cooed. Oh. Look at that knife movement. That definitely wouldn't work in real life, but it looks sweet. Himiko cheered. Yes. Stab. Shoot. Punch. Kill. Kyoka cheered. Stab. Shoot. Punch. Kill. The rest of them cheered. Of course, new interests had led to gaining new friends. AKA had already been interested in guns before he was, and although now her interest wasn't as strong as his, they still managed to bond quite well over their new shared love of firearms. Himiko had brought him into the lovely world of knives. Himiko seemed to like any kind of bladed weapon, but for whatever reason, Kuki only really liked knives. They just fit his aesthetic better. But of course, Himiko also had a not-so-small appreciation for guns as well, and the bloody spectacle they created. And Kyoku was just an appreciator of violence. Funny enough, these three, despite their interest, never got any model guns. They just hadn't known they existed. Because, unlike Kuki, none of them had been stupid enough to ask Izuku for a gun. Naturally, after they found out, they would choose to amend that error, and further bonding ensued. Furthermore, all those military movies had awakened a few more things in him. First of all was a love for the military aesthetic, which meant he could add even more to his wardrobe. It's not that he wanted to wear military clothes, those just didn't suit him. It's more that he wanted to take certain parts of that aesthetic, something that Kano and Sheena were more than happy to help him with. Alright, so what do you think? Shiruka asked as she finished tailoring the finer details, and Kano brought over a mirror so Kuki could look at themselves. This newest dress was still black like most of his clothes were. It was his favorite color after all. But other than that, it was very different. The material the dress was made of was harder and heavier material, and it was adorned with a lot of metal. A belt, metal buttons, badges that adorned the left side of his chest, and stars placed on the ends of his sleeves, and along his folded collar. It also sported a tie, which was a bit annoying, but it looked great, so he wouldn't complain. Perfect. Excellent work as always, girls. Kuki grinned, holding up his hand and giving both girls a high five for their efforts. Another interest that was awoken was, strangely enough, history. Specifically, he'd become curious about past wars and their tactics, things that often got glossed over in actual history class. This had nothing to do with fashion. It was just something he found interesting. So why do people keep attacking Russia in winter? Kuki asked as he stared at his textbook. Are they stupid? Ego, Yami answered. He was sitting next to Kuki, reading it alongside him. Smart people look dumb when they let pride control them. I'm gonna use that line someday. Kuki made sure to file away that quote in the recesses of his mind. Unfortunately, history and military tactics weren't too terribly popular around here, and Yami was the only one who even remotely shared his interest in this subject. Later that night, Kuki flopped onto his bed after he finished putting on his pajamas, utterly exhausted from all the activities he did today, but also utterly satisfied with it all. Also, that exhaustion made crawling into bed feel way better than it used to back when he just sat around all day. Kuki smiled as he slowly began to drift off. Yeah, this is what living is about. This is what I've been waiting for. And with that, the boy fell asleep, more content than he'd ever been.